son of Mexican immigrants. His debut book of poems, this fabulous book, Citizen Illegal, was a finalist for the Penn Stein Award and winner of the 2018 Chicago Review of Books Poetry Prize. It was named a top book in 2018 by the Adroit Journal, National Public Radio, and New York Public Library. Along with Felicia, Chavez, and Willie Perdomo, he is co-editing the forthcoming anthology, which he has a copy with, I think, to show off today. It looks beautiful, called the BreakBeat Poets, Volume 4, LatiNEXT, from the great publisher that published this book as well, Haymarket Books. He is co-host of a poetry podcast, The Poetry Gods. He has won a number of important awards, including the Ruth, Lilly, and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Fellowship from Poetry Foundation. His work has been featured in the New York Times, the Paris Review, and elsewhere. If we could please put our hands together for José Olivarez.
What's up, everyone? My name is José Olivarez. Real quick, raise your hand if this is your first time at a poetry reading. All right, cool. That's like most of the room. Welcome. What you need to know is, one, even though we are in this room that looks like very decorous, or I don't even know if that's a word, but it looks very fancy to me. We have these ceilings right here. We're not in the library, and so basically what I'm trying to tell you is you're allowed to make noise and respond. You don't need to be quiet. There's a few different ways that you can respond. You can snap your fingers. Let me see you snap your fingers. Right, I'm sure you're familiar with that stereotype. That's cool. You can clap your hands. Let me see you clap. That was like a golf clap, but I'll allow it. That's cool. Yeah, so make yourselves comfortable. I'm going to start by reading a poem that is not my own. I'm going to read a poem from this anthology that I helped edit. It's called the BreakBeat Poets, Volume 4, LatiNEXT. It's available for pre-order right now, so if you already have a copy of Citizen Illegal and you want to go ahead and pre-order this, that would be really great. The poem that I'm going to read is by a poet named Ren Romero, who is living out in Boston right now. It's called A Letter from the X in LatiNEXT. Dear you, I've heard you don't know how to say my name. I've heard you say there's no way to say it in Spanish. I heard you say that it's a sound which doesn't exist, that it's an act of imperialism by American teenagers on the internet. I heard you want to know my nation of origin, just in case you need to protect Spanish from me. I've heard you say, we're not Latin, we don't speak Latin, like you've never held a dollar or been to a funeral. Dímelo, ¿qué es la X en Mexica? Did I make that up too? Shit, maybe I did. I know I made up my name, maybe I made up my whole history too. Fuck it, sorry. Am I messing up your language? Maybe I mean to. Maybe I need to remind Spanish that it's as uncomfortable on my tongue as English, French, and Latin before it. Maybe I need to remind you this is nobody's country. Maybe I need to remind you that we haven't heard the future yet. Maybe I do mean to fuck up your language, and your country, and your family, and your church, and your whole whack-ass colonial gender system while I'm at it. Fuck it. Maybe I am an invention of the internet teens. Maybe I am a hallucination of the collective chingonas who couldn't tell you when the Mexican-American War ended. Fuck it. You don't know how to say my name? Good. Maybe I like it that way. Maybe I like a little uncertainty. You don't know how to say my name? Here's one way. Like the X in Mexica. Shh. Like Latin-ish. Like only kinda Latin. Or like Latin-ish. Or Latinish. Like be quiet. Or the grammar police will ask you where we came from. Here's another. Latinx rhymes with ese. Phonetically in Spanglish, X equals eje. equals ehe, as in ehe. You tried to leave without paying respect. I've heard you got a lot of questions and don't like digging for answers. I've heard you don't like how history feels under fingernails. I've heard you ask how to say my name. You do it with respect. Besos, la X en LatiNEXT. So that poem was by Ren Romero. I'm going to start with this poem. It's called Mexican American Disambiguation. It's after a poet named Idris Goodwin. My parents are Mexican, who are not to be confused with Mexican Americans or Chicanos. I'm a Chicano from Chicago, which means I'm a Mexican American with a fancy college degree and a few tattoos. My parents are Mexican, who are not to be confused with Mexicans still living in Mexico. Those Mexicans call themselves Mexicanos. White folks at parties call them pobrecitos. American colleges call them international students and diverse. My mom was white in Mexico, and my dad was mestizo, and after they crossed the border, they became diverse and minorities and ethnic and exotic. But my parents call themselves Mexicanos, who again should not be confused for Mexicanos living in Mexico. Those Mexicanos might call my family gringos, which is the word my family calls white folks. And white folks call my parents interracial. Colleges say, put them on a brochure. My parents say, ¿qué significa esa palabra? I point out that all the men in my family marry lighter-skinned women. That's a Chicano in me, which means it's a fancy college degrees in me, which is also diverse in me. Everything in me is diverse, even when I eat American foods like hamburgers, which, to clarify, are American when a white person eats them and diverse when my family eats them. So much of America can be understood like this. My parents were undocumented when they came to this country. And by undocumented, I mean sin papeles. And by sin papeles, I mean royally fucked, which should not be confused with the American dream, though the two are cousins. Colleges are not looking for undocumented diversity. My dad became a citizen, which should not be confused with keys to the house. We were safe from deportation, which should not be confused with walking the plank, though they're cousins. I call that sociology, but that's just a Chicano in me, who should not be confused with the diversity in me, or the Mexicano in me, who is constantly fighting with the upperly mobile in me, who is good friends with the Mexican American in me, who the colleges love, but only on brochures, who the government calls non-white Hispanic or white Hispanic, who my parents call mijo, even when I don't come home so much. So this next poem is called I Love the World, So I Married It. It's a poem that I wrote. I had this piece of language stuck in my head.
Could you try?
It's okay. I had this piece of language stuck in my head that I remember from childhood where, people used to say, like, if you love it so much, why don't you marry it, right? And so I had this phrase stuck in my head, and I was trying to write a poem from it. And so this is what I came up with. I love the world, so I married it. Music. Even on the day my grandma died, there were mangoes, though I tasted nothing. But slowly I came back to the world and carne asada, better than I remembered, smoke off the meat. I couldn't contain my happiness, even though it felt offensive to smile with my grandma buried and getting eaten by the flowers. And sometimes I look at my love and think I would like to stay, to put a welcome mat on our doorstep with our names hyphenated. When I was young, I believed in forever. Then my uncle died, and I knew forever included none of my family, included no friends. Their stories rotting in my head until I lose them again. So I know I will divorce the world and let it keep my most treasured possessions. A 6-piece with lemon pepper and mild sauce on, all the honey of a slow kiss, my Apple Music playlist, the way mi abuelita smiled and called me Lupito. I hated that name, except when she said it. This next poem is called Getting Ready to Say I Love You to My Dad, It Rains. This poem led to one of the proudest moments for me since I started kind of reading from this book, and that is that in a high school in the western Chicago suburbs, this young man who had gotten a free copy of my book, he came up to get it signed, and he was like, I just feel like I should give you something back. And so he thought about it, and he went back, and he was also like in the school, he was like the kid who sold bags of chips to other kids. So he came back and he gave me a free bag of hot chips, which is not in my bio, but one of my favorite achievements is that I impressed a teenager so much that they gave me a free bag of hot chips. And I think this was a poem that I read, so I'm going to read it to you now. Getting ready to say I love you to my dad, it rains. I love you, Dad, I say to the cat. I love you, Dad, I say to the sky. I love you, Dad, I say to the mirror. It rains and my mom's plants open their mouths. My dad stays on the couch. Maybe the couch opened its mouth and started eating my dad. I love you, Dad, I say to the couch. Its tongue working my dad like a puppet. I hear the rain fall and think the city is drinking or making itself clean. I am here with my dad and the TV drones on and on, so I'm not sure I hear it. My dad grunting and nodding, not the mushy stuff I was expecting. Neither of us cry, no hug or a kiss, just a grunt and a nod. I love you, Dad, I say to my dad. We sit together and watch TV. Outside it rains. My dad turns the volume up. The city is drunk. The city is singing badly in the shower. I killed a plant once because I gave it too much water. Lord, I worry that love is violence. My dad is silent and our relationship is not new or clean. I killed a plant once because I didn't give it enough water. My dad and I watch TV on a rainy day. We rinse our mouths with this water. All right, I'm gonna read you a new poem. And hopefully you enjoy it. This poem is tentatively titled, Who Offered Us Their Daily Bread? Kneeling in the pews, my parents prayed to the statue of Christ for protection. We were new to Chicago. We were new to this country. Alone, you might jump to say, but it wasn't just Christ in that church. There was the Mexican family that housed us, the Mexican family that connected us to their immigration lawyers, the Mexican family that got my dad a job, the Mexican family that invited us to birthday parties, the Mexican family that showed us how to make calls back to Mexico. There was Christ pinned to the wall, offering us salvation at a later date, and there were Mexicans with no time to wait. So that one still needs work. I got it. This is also a new poem. This is a poem. I read you a poem that I wrote for my dad, so this is one I wrote for my mom. It's called Nation of Domination. Some things you need to know. Nation of Domination was a wrestling group in like the early 90s. It was the wrestling group that The Rock was a part of, and he eventually betrayed the leader of the group, who was named Farouk, to kind of break out and become his own star. So that's what I'm saying when I say Nation of Domination. Farouk is in this, The Rock is in this. There's also a band called Los Bukis. So Los Bukis is my mom's favorite band. I think that's all you need to know. nation of domination. My mom hugs me and wants me to stay. I have my foot on the pedal, a fake gold chain on my neck. I confess I'm a sucker. I never want magicians to reveal their secrets. I want to live in the unknowing where everything is possible. My mom dances with me to los bookies. She thinks this makes me her baby still. Perspective is a magic trick. I hit my brother with the rock bottom, and I bet you can guess what I leave out. Ask Farouk if you need a hint. The brain is full of magic I don't understand. No one signs up to take a dive. In wrestling, there's a team of writers who decide who wins and who loses. The metaphor is obvious. My mom wasn't born to play the role of mom. I don't care how many baby dolls she played with. I dance with my mom to los bookies, and you're a fool if you believe it's her son she's trying to hold on to. How are y'all doing? You still good? Yeah? All right. I think, I know what I'll read. So this next poem is called No Vaporu. And it is a poem that I wrote because in all my time reading literature, I never saw anybody mention Vaporu. And as someone that grew up with 3 essential medicines of Vaporu and, Seven Up and aloe if you had a cut or something. Vaporu was essential. So anyway, I wrote this poem. If you don't speak Spanish and you don't know what Vaporu is vapor rub in English. But I never heard that before. So I remember when I went to college, I was sick and a roommate was like, "You want some vapor rub?" I have vapor rub. And I was like, "What the hell is vapor rub?" And he showed me the blue bottle, and I was like, "Oh, Vaporu! Why didn't you just say Vaporu? That's what it's called." All right, Vaporu. Vaporu is pronounced Vaporu, like loud or chew. The label for Vaporu says it's for cough suppression, but in my house, Vaporu is for headaches, sore muscles, nightmares, and everything else. Put some Vaporu on my dad's diabetic toes and watch the sugar evaporate. Miss a day of church? Put some Vaporu on your forehead and watch forgiveness flush your cheeks. Put some Vaporu on our bank account and watch the bill collector stop calling. When I forget a word in Spanish, I take a teaspoon of Vaporu under the tongue. All right. This next poem is called "You Get Fat When You're in Love." And it's a true story. You get fat when you're in love. You got a little extra love on your ankles. Love hanging over your belt line. Love makes it hard to fit inside your pants sometimes. Love got you buying bigger sizes. Need deeper pockets for all this love. Your buttons can't hold all the love rippling up the middle of your rib cage. Love turns those shirts into accordions. You make music with this love. Carry yourself like a song. When you get skinny, everyone rushes to compliment you. They want to know what your secret is. Tell me, they say, what's your secret? You look great. Call it the broke heart diet. Love left you, then you left you. Now all you have is this disappearing body. Cool. There's some seats in the audience if you would like to sit down, if you got here a little late. No one will hold it against you. I think I'll read maybe 3 or so more poems, and then we'll jump into the questions. Let's see. All right, I'll read this poem. This poem is called "My Therapist Says Make Friends with Your Monsters," which is a true thing that my therapist said to me. And I was like, are you the poet? Why are you dropping bars on me? My therapist says, make friends with your monsters. You felt that, right? We are gathered in truth because my therapist said it was time to stop running, and I pay my therapist too much to be wrong, so I am here. My monsters look almost human in the sterile office light. My monsters say they want to be friends. I remember when we first met, me and my monsters. I remember the moment I planted each one. Each time I tried to shed a piece of myself, it grew into a monster. Take this one with the collar of belly fat, the monster called chubby, husky, gordito. I climbed out of that skin as fast as I could, only to see some spirit give it legs. I ran, and it never stopped chasing me, each new humiliation coming to life and following after me. After me, a long procession of sad monsters, each monster hungry to drag me back, to return me to the dirt I came from. My monsters crowd around me. My therapist says I can't make the monsters disappear no matter how much I pay her. All she can do is bring them into the room so I can get to know them, so I can learn their names, so I can see clearly their toothless mouths, their empty hands, their pleading eyes. All right, I'll read you two more poems. This next poem is called "I Asked Jesus How I Got So White." Depending on the population of the room in question, I get asked what I am. My mom told me I'm Mexican, but because Mexican women can't be trusted, some people want to know if I'm really Mexican. Because I know I'm a questionable narrator when it comes to my own life. I asked Jesus how I got so white, and Jesus says, man, I've been trying to figure out the same damn thing myself. All right, this is the last poem that I'll read for now. This poem is called Mexican Heaven. In my book, it's split up into 8 different sections. But I'll read it all together for you right now, and then we can have a conversation and we can talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you, Mark and Lori, for bringing me out. This poem is called Mexican Heaven. 1. All of the Mexicans sneak into heaven. St. Peter has their name on the list, but none of the Mexicans have trusted a list since Ronald Reagan was president. 2. St. Peter is a Mexican named Pedro, but he's not a saint. Pedro waits at the gate with the shot of tequila to welcome all the Mexicans to heaven, but he gets drunk and forgets about the list. All the Mexicans walk into heaven, even our no-good cousins who only go to church for baptisms and funerals. 3. It turns out God is one of those religious Mexicans who doesn't drink or smoke weed, so all the Mexicans in heaven party in the basement while God reads the Bible and thumbs a rosary. God threatens to kick all the Mexicans out of heaven si no paran con las pendejadas, so the Mexicans drink more discreetly. They smoke outside where God won't smell the weed. God pretends the Mexicans are reformed. Hallelujah. This cycle repeats once a month. Amen. 4. Jesus has a tattoo of La Virgen de Guadalupe covering his back. It turns out he's your cousin Jesus from the block. It turns out he gets reincarnated every day, and no one on earth cares all that much. 5, all the Mexican women refuse to cook, or clean, or raise the kids, or pay bills, or make the bed, or drive you to work, or do anything except watch their novelas. So heaven is gross. The rats are fat as roosters, and the men die of starvation. 6, there are white people in heaven too. They build condos across the street and ask the Mexicans to speak English. I'm just kidding. There are no white people in heaven. 7, tamales, tacos, tostadas, tortas, pozole, sopes, huaraches, menudo, horchata, jamaica, limonada, agua. 8, St. Peter lets Mexicans into heaven, but only to work in the kitchens. A Mexican dishwasher polishes the crystal, smells the meals, and hears the music. They dream of another heaven, one they might be allowed in if only they work hard enough. Thank you.
All right. So we've got plenty of time for questions. I know you have questions. Yeah, first one.
If you were born into a different racial background, do you feel you'd write the same content you do now?
That's so hard to say, if only because your racial background and your ethnic background, for me, it plays such a big role into how I've received the world. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily the most important thing, but it has had such a huge impact in my interactions with the world. And so, of course, I think my interactions with the world would be different, and so my poetry would be different. But it's so hard to say in exactly what ways. Yeah.
Do the dynamics and relationships you have with your family, especially immediate family like mom and dad, does that play into the types of a lot of the poems in Citizen Illegal?
Yeah, I think my relationships with my parents are a big part of Citizen Illegal, in part because I think how can I put it? One, I'm very conscious of the choices that my parents made in order for me to be in the rooms that I'm in, and so I'm always thinking about the sacrifices that they've made and how I can honor them. And I'm also always conscious of the gap between maybe the life that they dreamed of for me, which so often, when they were talking to me was like lawyer, doctor, professional of some kind, and the kind of life that I've chosen for myself. And it's also something that I know is not unique to me. You know what I mean? I think family dynamics. I think the other thing that I'll say is for this book, I was thinking about how, in LatiNEXT families, and maybe in other families too, there are all of these silences that exist between family members. And I think sometimes those silences become more exaggerated when you factor in some of the political realities. My parents were undocumented for a long time, so they would take us to go see an immigration lawyer, but they didn't tell us what exactly was going on. You know what I mean? So there were all of these secrets that my mom and dad had to keep from me and my brothers just as a means of surviving, so we wouldn't accidentally say something to somebody. So those relationships then become even more fascinating to me.
How do you overcome writing loss?
That's a good question. I try to think about writing the way that I think about any other job that I've had, right? So my first job was working at a meat packaging factory, and my job was to put stickers before the package got laminated shut. And I couldn't have like stickers block, you know what I mean? Like if I didn't feel like working, I still had to show up and do my shift. And so I think about writer's block the same way, where you know, I know I'm not going to write great poems every single time out, but it's my job to show up and to try to do my work to the best of my ability. And I have to kind of make peace with the fact that like part of that process is messing up and fouling a whole bunch.
For you, like, where do you feel is like the most inspiring place to like write poems?
The most inspiring place to write poems is a cafe called Lovely Cafe in Chicago, which was closed like 3 months after my book came out. So now I'm like in search of a new, like most inspiring place to work. But I really love that cafe. The baristas like knew me and they would give me free coffee. And if there was like some extra frittata, they would be like, here you go. So I really love that spot.
In the back.
When we're teaching little kids how to read, we talk about mirrors and windows. So if a kid sees themselves in a book, that's a mirror. If they see a culture or something, experience that they don't know about, that's a window. So when you were writing, were you hoping that your book was going to be more of a mirror or a window for people?
I was hoping that it would be more of a mirror for people. And I've heard that language before, but to kind of put it back into the way that I was thinking about it, when I was thinking about it, I was like, all right, I think it's kind of a waste of breath to try and convince Donald Trump supporters that, you know, undocumented people, that immigrants, that LatiNEXT people are human beings and have a right to be alive and do more than survive. And so I'm not trying to write a book of poems to like appeal to their humanity, right? I don't like, you know, that dude sits in his office and sees pictures of like young people incarcerated all day and it doesn't move him, right? So like my poems are not gonna change his mind. But what hopefully my poems can do is like open conversations with the people that are already invested in making the change, can maybe give other LatiNEXT people a mirror by which they feel then that they can tell their own story. Because of course, like, there's no perfect mirror, right? Like there's a million different LatiNEXT stories and mine doesn't begin to encapsulate all of them. And so I was hoping to move them primarily. And what I found is, kind of to go back to your language, is that a lot of other people have found it to be a window in a way that's been really cool for me, and that I hadn't really spent too much time thinking about before.
Well, you helped it along by making it so funny to read. I really, really love the book. And I think that you helped people who might have had a harder time appealing by making them laugh.
Thank you. You know, something that I've been thinking about is, like, for me, the humor is maybe like the most Mexican part of the book. Like that is like all my family, every time there's a crisis, the first thing they do is crack jokes about it. And I think part of that is also like wrapped up in anger. And I do think of my book as like being like it has an anger that I don't think often gets talked about. And I think the anger is tied to that humor. And so sometimes I think people only see the humor where there's also like, you know, for me, a little bit of like a knife edge or something to it too.
What helps you get into like that creative mode that like helps you start writing? Like, is there music that you listen to that helps you like, or like what is your thing? I guess.
The most helpful thing for me is there's two things that come to mind. One, it helps for me if I do my writing in the morning, because if I try to write late at night, I'm just like consumed with all of my worries for the day, right? Like I'm thinking about what bills I have to pay. I'm thinking about like, it's just, I get wrapped up in my own thoughts and it makes it harder to write. The other thing that I like to do is before I even start trying to write creatively, I just try to write down everything that's kind of stressing me out in like a list. And then I just try to put that to the side so that then when I'm trying to write creatively, I don't have to go back and think about like, oh, that's right, I have to email so-and-so, these are the bills that I have to pay, whatever. So it helps me to be able to like give myself space to be stressed for like 10 minutes, write everything down, and then put it away so that I can kind of focus on my creative work. Which is not to say that like those stresses don't make their ways into the poems. I think that happens, but I don't want to be distracted from creating to do these things that can wait until later. Right here.
When did you start writing poetry?
I started writing poetry when I was 15 years old. I started in high school. We had a poetry slam club, and I wanted to be part of the club. And the poets in that club, they were the first writers that I ever met. Up until that time, we read a bunch of different books, but no living writers had ever come and presented to us. So it never occurred to me that you could be from somewhere like Calumet City, Illinois, which is like a steel town, which is like hella immigrant, hella black, and write books. I just thought if you wanted to write books, you had to be born in like England, you know what I mean? Like Shakespeare was English, they were all British. So I was just like, that's where books come from. And so when my classmates started sharing their poems, that's when I was like, oh, like we can read books and we can write books, and this can be a conversation.
Upon reading the book for the first time, I thought your use of the Jay-Z lyric was very, very interesting on the first few pages of the inside the book. It was interesting to see how little it was, but how big of a statement it said. It also made me laugh a little bit, as you said before. So I was just curious for your use of using that lyric.
Yeah,
it wasn't.
Yeah, I wanted to use that lyric because I wanted it from the beginning to be understood that I was hoping to have a conversation with everyone, and not like my book. When I think about like book of poems, I wasn't sitting in a forest like writing theoretically, right? Like I was writing my book for real people. I was like, the book is blurred by two of my students. Like I was writing it in conversation with the world, and so I wanted it to be, I love Gloria and Sardua, right? And so I could have put like something from Borderlands, but I didn't want it to be like framed by theory. I wanted to be framed by music, to be framed by also like pop culture, to be understood that it was, not just something to be thought about theoretically, hopefully, but something to kind of be experienced as music, as art, as everyday kind of culture.
Thank you.
In the back.
Were there any poems that you were like scared of this book to publish, or were you like confident in all of them?
It's kind of both. I was confident to a degree because, before the book came out, I felt like I knew my audience, you know what I mean? Like I was living in Chicago, and there would be like the same 25 people that came out to the open mic. And so I was like, that's my audience, is those 25 people. And so I know the poems work for those 25 people, so I feel confident about that, right? If I had known before I published the book that it would be many, many, many more people than those 25 people, I think I would have felt a lot less confident, if that makes sense. The other part of that, the part where I wasn't confident, was like, I gave the book to my brothers before it was published, and I made sure that I was like, did I make any of this up? Like, am I telling lies? Like, is this good? Like, should I, tell me if you think that I should just not publish it, and I won't. because to me, you know, I wasn't writing it to serve my ego. I was hoping that it was something that would be truthful and useful, and be about more than just myself.
To that idea of being useful and truthful, like writing in all its forms, prose or poetry, have an incredible impact on the communities that read it. What has been your experience in your impact beyond getting your hot chips? And like, have you had the impact that you were hoping to have?
I've had a lot more impact than I was hoping to have in some ways. Because like I said, I thought they'd be like 25 people that bought my book. You know what I mean? Like I was like, my mom will buy a copy, my brother will buy some copies, and like that's kind of it. Some of the things that have been cool, I got to meet Sandra Cisneros, who's like a longtime hero of mine, so that was really cool to see that, you know, it had made its way into her orbit. I got to like read poems in front of my parents and have my parents tell me that they were proud of me. I got a chance to, like, one of the coolest moments is at a high school in Chicago. They brought like all the juniors and seniors, and after I read poems, all of them, I have pictures I could show you, but they like all sworn me and asked me to like sign their phone cases. You know what I mean? Like they were like, I don't have the book, but will you sign this piece of paper? Will you sign this napkin? And so it's cool to see them get that excited about poetry and be like, you know, to be like, wow, this is cool. And I think the other thing for me is that it's also allowed me to have more conversations. Like one of the things that for me is a critique that I have of my book is that it's maybe too nationalist. Like at the end of the day, I wish, one of the things that I've been thinking about is how, you know, all nationalisms are flawed, right? Because I don't want to make it seem like Mexico is perfect and the United States is like perfectly awful. Like that's not the truth. Like both countries are flawed and every country is flawed, right? And so I guess moving forward, I want to think about like what is beyond nationalism, I guess, is like one of the questions that I have now. In the back, in here.
So your poem, When You Get Fat When You're in Love, was a lot of our favorites throughout the whole book, so I was really excited that you read it. I was just wondering what the story was behind that one.
The story is, I was hanging out with my friends, and my friend Brittany was talking about my friend Lamar, and Brittany was like, you can always tell when Lamar is in a relationship because like when he's in a relationship, he starts to get a little chubby. And when he's not in a relationship, he slims down real quick. And you know, Lamar he was like, yeah, that's true. And it just made me think about my own experiences. And so, you know, I like the sound of the title, You Get Fat When You're in Love. And so I tried to write that poem. But it was just that. It was just hanging out with friends and like laughing at, you know, these little jokes between them. Over here.
Which poem that you have written, you know, whether it's from Citizen Illegal or anything previous, which poem are you most proud of?
The poem that I'm most proud of is Mexican Heaven. That's my favorite poem. It's why I split it up kind of throughout the book. It's because if I put it at the very beginning of the book, then, you know, you read it at the very beginning, but then you don't come back to it. If I put it at the very end of the book, then I was risking that people never got to that poem. I like that I split it up and kind of made it like the chorus of the book. Like you're always coming back to Mexican Heaven. And I'm just proud of it because I think like the form just really worked out well. Like the vignettes, like the quick kind of shots of humor, but at the same time, I think, you know, some of that anger that I was talking about and some of like the very kind of real circumstances underneath it, I just think, you know, if I can brag for a little bit, I think I did my thing on that one. Yeah.
Who who are your biggest, be it poetry, inspirations, or just general, who are your biggest inspirations? Like any famous authors or anything like that?
In terms of authors, there's so many. Like I said, Sandra Cisneros is a big one. Lucille Clifton is another poet that I think about often. Aracelis Guimard is brilliant. If you haven't read her work, I highly recommend it. Ada Limon, Natalie Diaz, some of my contemporaries in Chicago, Nate Marshall, Eve Ewing. These are all people that I'm trading poems with. So those are some of my big influences.
What inspired you to write Mexican women can't be trusted?
Oh, that part in I asked Jesus how I got so white.
Yeah.
The fact that my very first job was as interpreter for my mom. And so I sat in many rooms where my mom told me to translate and tell doctors what she was saying, and the doctors wouldn't believe her. You know what I mean? Just seeing how often, men in particular disregarded the things that Mexican women said throughout my life. So part of it is I wrote that poem knowing full well who I am, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's just playing with the way that people misidentify or whatever. So that's where that line comes from.
If you had to pick which poem would you want to be the most impactful from the book for people, which one would you want to have the most impact on people?
Which one would I want to have the most impact? What do you mean?
There was one that really, when you talked about your grandma, and she had that one really impacted me. Is there a specific one that you wanted everyone to just feel a certain impact, or were you hoping that everybody got something different from it?
I don't know. I think it's different for everyone. I think that one, the two poems that have turned out to be the most impactful poems, I think, are the one that I wrote for my grandma, I Love the World, So I Married It. And then the other one would be the one that I wrote for my dad, which is the one that I read for you all. Getting ready to say I love you to my dad, it rained. And those are two poems that, going into the launch of the book, I had no idea that they would be I think about ordering a book the way that I think about mixtapes, right? And so I had no idea that those would be two of the bangers of the book, where people really love those. But I also really love those poems, and so I get to experience them in this new way, in this shared way with people. So it's become really powerful for me to get to re-encounter my own poems in that way.
A couple of final words. If you are here for my class, don't forget your selfie. You need to take a selfie, send it to me. If you haven't done so, do so now. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. If you want to get a book signed, Jose will stick around and sign books. If you don't have a book, the bookstore is here in the back with books. Otherwise, if you could give a big thank you to